Voice in the brain. At a table in the cafeteria of Parnell College, Dean Belmont was speaking to Dr. Enesco, school psychiatrist. "I'm worried about Tom Andrews," he said. "Really worried. I've told him to see you at your office at 3 o'clock this afternoon. He needs the help of a psychiatrist. I don't want my mathematics professor to crack up." "Glad to see him," Enesco said. "What seems to be wrong?" "He's been hearing a voice which has been giving him orders, telling him what to do." "Hallucinations," Enesco said, nodding his head. "How long has this been going on?" "Nearly a year, apparently. He never said a word to anybody about it until this morning, when he came to my office and told me he was going to leave the university. Naturally, I asked why, and he came up with this story. That's why I'm shooting him over to you, fast." "I suppose," said Enesco, "that you tried to convince him that this voice was imaginary?" "I certainly did. But he only smiled with a sort of faraway look in his eyes, the sort of look that a man gets just before he goes insane." "Maybe it's not as serious as all that," Enesco said. "After all, many of us have had hallucinations now and then, especially when we've been working too hard. Don't forget, Tom Andrews is not only teaching higher mathematics to several hundred students here, but also doing research in astrophysics for the astronomy department." Enesco looked at his watch and rose from the table. "I've got to get back to the office now. Leave Andrews to me. I'll call you after I've seen him." At precisely 3 o'clock that afternoon, the door to Enesco's office opened, and Tom Andrews came in. He was tall and terribly thin, with the bright, rather feverish eyes of a fanatic. "Sit down, Tom," Enesco said from behind his desk. "Dean Belmont told me you were coming." Andrews sat on the edge of the chair and nodded sharply. "I told him I'd come." Enesco leaned back and smiled. "Did you want to come?" "Yes, I guess I owe it to him. After all, I'm leaving the university for good. I imagine he told you about me?" "He didn't tell me very much of anything. Just that you'd been hearing a voice and that he was worried about you. Suppose you go on from there." "It seems hardly worthwhile," Andrews said, pushing himself back in the chair. "Let's have it anyhow," Enesco said. "I've never known you to waste anybody's time. You've got the clearest mind I've ever come across." "I'll take it from the beginning," Andrews said. "About 10 months ago, I was walking alone one night down by the lake, and I heard a voice. At first, I thought that someone had approached me, but there was no one around. The voice came from inside my brain. It was perfectly clear, and its purity of diction was almost startling." "Go on," Enesco said. "It identified itself as belonging to a scientist on the planet Omar, satellite of the star Omega Apophilon. It was..." "Just a minute," Enesco said. "Is Omega Apophilon a real star?" "Of course. As to its having a planetary system, I don't know for sure, but it's well within the realm of probability." "Go on," Enesco said. "The voice told me that the scientists on Omar needed me. They were working on a problem which they can't handle. They've searched the universe for a mind which can solve this problem, or at least one which has the qualifications they think necessary to its solution. Now, don't ask me how they searched the universe, because I don't understand it exactly myself. And I don't know how they can project their thoughts over more than 150 trillion miles of space. It was always a one-way conversation, from them to me. Naturally, they speak in English. I'm sure that they'd speak to a Frenchman in French or a Hindu in Hindustani. I thought it was inevitably translated by a man into his material language." "Have you heard this voice since the first time?" "Naturally. It has given me my orders. They're sending a ship for me. It has been on its way for 8 months, and it'll arrive tonight. That's the reason I spoke to Dean Belmont this morning." Andrews grinned. "I didn't want him to send out searching parties for me and call the police and possibly the FBI." Enesco smiled back. "I should say not. Now, listen to me, Tom. I suppose you're convinced that this voice is real, but has it ever occurred to you that it's a hallucination?" "Never." Andrews rose from his chair. "And now, if you'll pardon me, I'll be going along. The ship arrives at 9 o'clock tonight, and I've got a lot to do." There was a sharp sound of command in Enesco's voice. "What would happen if you didn't go?" "It's never occurred to me not to go." "Do you think they'd punish you?" "They might. They might punish the whole Earth. They're very powerful on the planet Omar." He turned and strode from the room. Enesco was on the telephone the moment he heard the door close. "Dean Belmont," he said, "we've got a man here with a serious obsession, delusions of grandeur, and a persecution complex. I didn't hold him here because I want to watch him without his knowing. Will you come to my office at 8 o'clock this evening? No, I'll tell you about it when you get here. I have 4 more patients to see before I have my dinner." At 8:45 that evening, Professor Ionesco and Dean Belmont, standing behind a large rhododendron bush and feeling like fictional sleuths, saw Tom Andrews come down the steps of his boarding house on College Street. He carried a small black suitcase. They waited until he had walked nearly a block and then started after him. The night was warm and the full moon stood clear in the heavens. Andrews turned left at the end of College Street and continued along Archer, which became a dirt road after 200 yards. "He really believes this. This spaceship is going to pick him up," Dean Belmont whispered. Ionesco nodded, puffing lightly, for the pace was rapid. "He's heading for that large field over there." Andrews had turned off the road and was leaning down now, fumbling in his suitcase. The 2 men halted and stepped to the side of the road into the darkness of a small grove of beech trees. "He's signaling," the dean whispered. Ionesco saw that Andrews had a long flashlight in his hand, swinging its powerful beam upward in a sort of figure-8 movement. "Look at that," Ionesco said. "Logical even in his delusion. He's making the mathematical symbol for infinity." A light breeze had sprung up and moved among the branches among them with a tingling sound. Ionesco looked upward into the heavens, following the moving beam of the flashlight. A strange, almost eerie feeling passed over him. The waving light dazzled his night-blind eyes, and it seemed to him that the shadows were lifting into the air, descending to the ground, moving, coming to rest. He shook his head to clear it, turned to Dean Belmont. The dean was motionless, a look of terror on his face. Come, Dean, you mustn't let your imagination get the better of you." For a moment, Belmont didn't speak. Then, slowly, his lips began to move, and the words he said came mechanically, as if he were repeating something he had heard. "Goodbye. I shall not see you again. I will communicate with you. Goodbye. Goodbye." Ionesco turned his head and looked towards the spot where Andrews had been standing. He was not there. The field was empty. And then suddenly, into the psychiatrist's brain came a clear, precise, beautifully articulated voice. "We will take good care of him, Doctor. You will forgive our taking him from you. Our need for him is greater than yours."